What's different about doing comedy? What do you miss when you don't do it?
I don't think there's a lot different if you're an actor.
It's honestly tough. It's honestly dirty.
Robert Redford's personal story lies under the glitter of Hollywood's silver screen. His extraordinary ability has enchanted audiences for about 90 years, and he has continued to do so for over 60 years. Despite her celebrity and fortune, Redford has suffered much loss and suffering throughout her life. We go deeply into Robert Redford's personal hardships that have impacted his journey in this film, uncovering his undiscovered narrative. Throughout his life, from his humble beginnings to his meteoric climb to stardom in Hollywood, we will delve into the secrets that make this iconic figure tick. Let us examine his formative years before delving into the awful details of his life. William, Robert Redford's paternal half-brother, is the lone sibling in his very small family. Robert was born on August 18, 1936, to Martha and Charles Redford. Robert went to Van Nuys High School and got the chance to meet Natalie Wood and baseball player Don Dale while he was a student there. Underneath his charismatic demeanor, Robert was a defiant student who sought solace in the company of a gang of adolescent males and found more meaning in extracurricular activities and sports than in his studies. At the Los Angeles Tennis Club, he became fast friends with Pancho Gonzalez, who shared his enthusiasm for the sport. Robert attended CU Boulder after high school, but he was kicked out of the university in his first year for being a Kappa Sigma brother. Despite this setback, he continued his education by traveling across Europe and finally enrolled in painting programs at Brooklyn's Pratt Institute and the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Robert overcame obstacles and weathered storms thanks to his dogged persistence and ability to bounce back from setbacks. The narrative of Robert Redford keeps on going, but one thing keeps popping up. Can this renowned actor, who has suffered tremendous loss and suffering all his life, be able to handle the emotional storms that are still to come? Keep watching to find out what happens at the end of his adventure. Like many other famous people from the 1950s, Redford started off modestly in the big metropolis of New York. As an actor, he perfected his profession by showcasing his ability and flexibility in a variety of settings, such as theater and television. Beginning his Broadway career in 1959 with a little part in Tall Story, he quickly rose to stardom after landing a major role in the 1963 production of Barefoot in the Park, co-starring the brilliant Elizabeth Ashley. Along with this, Redford has been seen in several Broadway shows, including Sunday in New York and The Highest Tree. Redford won a Golden Globe for his 1965 portrayal of a bisexual movie star in Inside Daisy Clover, which was much praised. He then moved on to bigger parts in films like Rescue 8 Inches and Breaking Point. In his early film appearances, Redford frequently portrayed the archetypal blonde guy, a form of typecasting that he was well aware of. He started being pickier about the parts he took on, seeking out those that would test his acting chops in an effort to shake this stereotype. Because of this, he adopted a new character in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, playing the part of a witty and insightful protagonist. Redford gained economic success in the 1970s with films such as Jeremiah Johnson and The Sting, further establishing him as a major Hollywood personality and a multi-talented actor. In the 80s, he took the leap into filmmaking, and his critically acclaimed debut feature, Ordinary People, won him a slew of accolades, including Best Director. A versatile actor, Redford proceeded to broaden his career in the late 90s and early 00s, with parts in films like The Last Castle, Spy Game, and The Clearing, demonstrating his versatility in the business. Captain America, The Winter Soldier, in which he played a villain and was excellent, was a high point of his career. After an accomplished acting career, Redford announced his retirement, leaving an impressive body of work in his wake. Nonetheless, he would not rule out a future appearance on film. Robert Redford's tendency to play the romantic protagonist in several of his films has been carefully studied by both fans and reviewers. Audiences were captivated by his magnetic performances as the kind and passionate lover he played on TV. As his real-life romance with Lola Van Wagenen demonstrates, this passionate guy persona was more than a facade for Redford. They started their love affair when they were married in a little ceremony in Las Vegas on August 9, 1958. On September 12, 1958, they had a second party in Lola's grandmother's house, but nobody knows what happened at their Vegas wedding reception. Amy Hart Redford, Scott Anthony Redford, Shauna Jean Redford, and David James Redford are the 4 children that Robert and Lola had together. Robert and Lola's marriage ended in 1982 when they chose to separate ways, despite their early devotion to one another. Although the public was not immediately informed about their divorce, speculation started circulating among those in the entertainment world. Their breakup was officially announced in 1985, however, rumors suggested they had been living apart for a while before that. Robert Redford rekindled his relationship with Sybil Zaggers after his divorce from Lola. After being together for a long time, since 1991, the happy pair tied the knot in a stunning German ceremony on July 11, 2009. Although many were taken aback by their marriage and long-term partnership, Redford and Zaggers saw it as a logical next step in their love journey. The tragic occurrences and losses that Robert Redford endured over his almost 90 years on this earth can be better understood in light of what is known about his life and accomplishments since he rose to fame in the 1950s. Despite his admiration and strength, Redford has had a tough existence, which makes his narrative all the more captivating and motivating. Few details are known about Robert Redford because of his reputation as a reticent person. His decision to collaborate with Michael Feeney Callan on a book of his dramatic life in 2011 surprised many. Redford detailed his fascinating life story in this biography, which included his boyhood struggle with polio. Paralysis, breathing problems, and even death can result from the crippling effects of polio, in case you're not aware with the disease's severity. People who were badly afflicted with polio sometimes spent their lives with iron lungs before the vaccine was developed in the 1950s. Despite catching polio in the 1930s or 1940s, when the vaccination was not yet available, Redford justified his exemption from iron lung confinement by saying his condition was minor. Nevertheless, due to the sickness, he still had to remain in bed for 2 weeks. Swimming in the ocean was how Redford caught polio. He didn't know he had it until he had trouble moving around and opening his eyes the next morning. Even though he wasn't completely paralyzed, he had a hard time moving about throughout that time. He was so terrified during his 2 weeks of bed rest after polio in the mid-1940s that he said it was the most terrifying thing he had ever experienced. Redford paid tribute to Jonas Salk, the man responsible for developing the polio vaccine, in 2014 with his participation in a short film titled Cathedrals of Culture. Robert Redford, the film's director, showcased his dedication to bringing attention to the disease and its effects on individuals through this 3D documentary, which centered on the San Diego Salk Institute for Biological Studies. Robert Redford's membership in a gang during his early years contributed to his reputation as a legendary troublemaker throughout his young stage. Rebellion and disobedience shaped Redford's adolescence, despite his later reverence as a Hollywood hero. He became involved in racial gang confrontations on a regular basis as a young man growing up in America after World War II, a culture plagued by rampant prejudice. On top of that, Redford was bullied because of his track career and the exclusive school he attended. As a test of bravery, Redford was challenged to leap from a lofty building by a gang member and an old bully when he was a teenager. Redford took the challenge, driven by a desire to show his strength, and he jumped with only a few small fractures. His place inside the gang was established, and his deviant actions were escalated by this brave move. Unfortunately, Redford's careless decisions caused him to experiment with narcotics like hashish and marijuana, and to participate in illegal drag racing in California, despite the risks involved. In spite of the growing dangers and consequences, Redford continued to lead his risky lifestyle. When he miraculously emerged from the debris of his vehicle collision on his way to a drag race, it was a key moment. After surviving the mayhem of his adolescence, Redford had a moment of introspection and thankfulness after this near-death incident. Redford admitted that his mother was there for him through thick and thin, believing in his abilities and standing by him no matter how defiant he was as a youngster. Martha Redford's convictions and intuition remained unshaken despite the challenges he caused for his parents. When her son achieved stardom in Hollywood in 1955, her faith in him was validated. The tragic miscarriage of Martha's twin children 8 years prior had left her with a blood problem, which tragically led to a hemorrhage that ended her life. Robert was entering adulthood and recuperating from polio when she died at the young age of 40. In spite of her tragic passing, Robert Redford pays tribute to his mother with the utmost respect and appreciation, always remembering her optimism and unfaltering support. During the 2018 Sundance Film Festival, which he co-founded, Redford deeply honored his mother by paying tribute to her influence on his life and work. At the following year's Utah Women's Leadership Celebration, he made care to acknowledge Martha, praising her for helping him overcome obstacles and achieve success. His mother, Martha Redford's unending support and encouragement had a profound impact on her son, who in turn went on to leave an enduring legacy in Hollywood and beyond. Robert, even before his mother passed away, had started to deal with loss at a very young age. From a young age on, he had to deal with the overwhelming grief that comes with losing a loved one. Robert Redford had a lot of misfortune and sadness in his life. Losing his mother was only one of many. He was already deeply affected by the loss of a father figure before to this unfortunate incident, which only deepened his reservoir of sadness. Both Martha and Charles were involved in Robert's upbringing, but Robert didn't get to spend as much time with his dad as he would have wanted since Charles had a tough profession as a milkman, a conscientious accountant who worked long and hard hours. Thankfully, his Uncle David was there for him and provided advice and comfort throughout those crucial years, acting as a second father figure. Through shared experiences and father-son pursuits, David and Robert became quite close. It appeared for a while that Robert's life was heading in the right direction, what with his strong bond with Uncle David providing him solace and security. But catastrophe struck again when David, the man he regarded as a second father figure, died in the line of duty during World War II. Tragically, David was enlisted in General Patton's Third Army and was killed in a crossfire in 1945 while crossing the Luxembourg Bridge in a vehicle. Robert lost a fantastic role model and mentor when he was tragically killed at a young age, which created a huge hole in his life. Anyone lucky enough to have known Uncle David would have been inspired by his extraordinary life. He was an all-American athlete who also happened to be fluent in many languages. He was very versatile and enjoyed life to the utmost. In an interview given in 2013, Robert Redford discussed the family's reaction to Uncle David's death. He pointed out that the family managed by being quiet, not asking too many questions, and just letting things happen. We create our own fate, good or bad, as the old saying goes. Not even the most famous people like Robert Redford are immune to the results of their choices. No one is exempt from the difficulties and disappointments that life throws at them. Redford's story is proof of that, despite his seeming inevitable climb to fame. He was kicked out of college because he stayed in the gang all through his teenage years and did all the dirty things they did. In 1954, Robert graduated from high school with ordinary grades but an exceptional athletic career, according to the biography he co-authored with Michael. We said before that he was bullied because of his track skills. Thanks to his athleticism, he was able to get into his first-choice university, the University of Colorado Boulder. His interest in the school's baseball program and the prospect of a sports scholarship were major factors in his decision to attend. Unfortunately, he had to abandon his passion for baseball when school began so that he could focus on his art studies. Robert Redford had become reclusive and had trouble forming friendships. Everything changed, though, when he got acquainted with a senior brother in the fraternity Kappa Sigma and received encouragement to expand his social circle and pursue his artistic interests. Despite the positive aspects, this newfound connection would prove to be his undoing in the end. Robert found it especially tough as he had formed a friendship with an older man who was fundamentally the same as his other gang members. Traditions persist. Even though he had an interaction with the police as a youngster, Robert was not a new guy. He was just renouncing his illegal ways. He quickly reverted to his former ways with the help of his new acquaintance, drag racing instead of studying, drinking freely and excessively, and performing practical jokes. This led to the revocation of his scholarship, which in turn prompted him to quit the University of Colorado after only 1.5 years. It was obvious that the consequences would have been catastrophic. His reputation as a party kid was well-deserved, but it cost him his scholarship. Still, Robert made a tasty concoction out of the lemons life had thrown at him. He traveled extensively over Europe, attended art school in Florence, and then settled in Paris. Afterwards, he continued his education at New York's American Academy of Dramatic Arts, NADA. Despite the obstacles he encountered, this choice set him on the course that would define his destiny as an actor and director. Picture this. You wake up one morning to find your seemingly healthy baby boy or girl lying lifeless in his cot. Following his expulsion from university, Robert devoted a great deal of time to mastering the art of painting. Even when he started performing in New York, the actor looked to have everything under control. He was wed to Lola Van Wagenen by the late 1950s, and their marriage had not ended tragically. Not only that, but he had just welcomed his first kid, Scott, into the world and had just made his Broadway debut in Tall Story. The star's life, in a nutshell, was rocking. Everyone observing would think he finally got his opportunity to unwind and have fun after all those years of pain and grief. Oh no, that's not right. A few months following his birth, Scott Redford passed away from SIDS. Scott's cause of death was mysterious, as is the case with every kid who dies from sudden infant death syndrome. This might be due to a wide variety of things. The loss of a kid may affect people in varying degrees, and Robert felt guilty that he hadn't checked on his child more frequently. He kept his sorrow and shame to himself, being the reclusive guy that he was. For more than half a century, he remained mute about his anguish over his child's death. In an interview from 2011, Robert discussed the loss of his kid openly. Because they were young and he did not have a good career, he said, this was very difficult for him and his wife. We didn't know anything about sudden infant death syndrome, so as a parent, you blame yourself. It creates a scar that never completely heals, according to him. With all the tragedies he had endured, including the death of his twin sisters over a decade ago, Robert would have found this incredibly challenging. This devastating tragedy changed Robert's perspective and left him with lasting emotional scars that he carried for a long time. Robert Redford must have gone through unfathomable mental and emotional pain following the tragic death of his first son. It is heartbreaking to consider the risk of losing his second kid in as little as 3 years. I can't even begin to fathom the anguish and horror that must have gripped him at that moment. After suffering the devastating loss of their first son, Redford and his wife continued to confront even greater difficulties as they welcomed more children into their household. James Redford, their second son, suffered from a wide range of illnesses beginning when he was a little boy. James had a lifetime of health difficulties, beginning with a severe case of hyaline membrane disease when he was a newborn and continuing with colitis, infections, digestive abnormalities, and blood flow problems. Colitis issues necessitated a liver transplant for 31-year-old James in 1993. His condition worsened even after the transplant, necessitating more medical treatments. In addition to dealing with Lola's health problems, Redford and his wife had to endure the unimaginable pain of losing another child. They must have been nearly overwhelmed by the stress of coping with Lola's health issues and the possibility of losing their children. It hurts to think of how the family may have felt all the time throughout this turbulent time. In 1983, Robert and his family went through yet more catastrophe, adding to all these anxieties and disappointments. This time, his daughter Shauna, who went on to have a successful creative career, was the primary object of his grief. Shauna had attended Colorado State University. Shauna swiftly became a media darling for all the wrong reasons, even though the institution decided against explicitly banning her. Many issues remain unsolved in the murder case regarding the terrible occurrence involving her boyfriend, a journalism student, who was shot strangely in the back of the head at his residence at the University of Colorado. As a result of a lack of evidence, the principal suspect, Thane Smika, who lived in the same room as the victim and had financial motivations, was freed from detention. Suspicion that Smika was involved in Sid Wells's death intensified following his 1986 enigmatic disappearance and the subsequent discovery of his abandoned automobile in Beverly Hills. New evidence surfaced in 2020, re-illuminating the case and accusing Smika once again. Robert is haunted by the unresolved case and the fact that Smika is still at large, even though age-progressed mug images have been issued. Despite his apprehension about the paparazzi and press, Robert chose to attend Sid Wells's burial, a gesture that said volumes about his profound sorrow and reverence for the deceased. A half-open door leads to a pitch-black room of uncertainty and unanswered questions, he said, describing his continued battle with Wells's loss. As they deal with the unsolved tragedy and the evasive suspect, Thane Smika, Robert and his family are burdened by the unsolved mystery surrounding Sid Wells's death. Renowned actors Robert Redford, Natalie Wood, and others were all born in Van Nuys. The legendary Natalie Wood was one of many famous alumni of Van Nuys High School. Although they shared a school, Robert and Natalie couldn't have been more different people and were hardly acquainted with one another. Even as a young child star, Natalie was already famous thanks to her roles in films like Miracle on 34th Street and her ascent to the Oscar nominations. While at Van Nuys High, Robert Redford was more renowned for his athleticism and reputation for causing problems. Co-starring as lovers in 60s films like Inside Daisy Clover and This Property is Condemned brought them together, and they became close friends off-screen. At one of Natalie's weddings, Robert was even her best man. As the one who recommended Wade Lewis to Warner Brothers, Natalie Wood was instrumental in Robert Redford's portrayal of the character in Inside Daisy Clover, for which he won a Golden Globe. Their tight connection ended abruptly in 1981 with Natalie's untimely death. On a boat excursion around Catalina Island with her husband Robert Wagner and actor Christopher Walken, the tragic Natalie, who drew her terrible dread of water, met her sad end. The circumstances of her death are still unknown, even after over 40 years. Her untimely death shocked Robert Redford, who was crushed by the loss of his 43-year-old buddy. Robert, who is usually quiet, has never been bashful about discussing his close connection with Natalie Wood. Robert feels a pang of sadness as he thinks of how much of an influence her companionship had on his life, and how little time they had to make memories that would last a lifetime. The everlasting romance between Robert Redford and Lola Van Wagner disproved the notion that famous people can't keep a serious relationship going. In spite of all the hardships they endured, their marriage was regarded as one of the most solid in Hollywood in the 80s. Robert and Lola drew strength from one another after the devastating death of their first child. They then went on to have 3 additional children, Shauna, James, and Amy. Their unwavering love and devotion to one another allowed them to persevere after such a tragic loss and carry on with their family-building endeavors. Robert and Lola made the heartbreaking choice to divorce in 2001, following 16 years of marriage. Their romance may have ended, but they handled the breakup with dignity and respect, keeping in touch as friends and expressing admiration for one another even after the divorce. They helped their children deal with the changes in a mature and considerate way by acting maturely and respectfully during their split. Even before Robert became famous, he was already deeply in love with Lola. Their union was a public declaration of their love for one another and an opportunity for Robert to assuage his family's skepticism. They were faithful to one another for a long time despite all that was going on, and then they decided to part ways. Robert wedded a German artist in 2009 when he discovered love again after his divorce. Even though he was hesitant to take that risk again, he eventually discovered joy and friendship again. The fact that he was able to pick himself up and fall in love again is evidence of how strong and resilient he is. Robert Redford had only begun to fully comprehend the dawn of his existence, but that did not mean life had ended. Inflicting suffering upon himself may be his go-to method of suicide. In the second half of 2020, James Redford, who was Robert Redford's son, died. Losing a kid is a tremendous pain. Losing 2 children at once would be unbearable, according to Robert Redford. When Robert Redford's second son passed away, he surely went through it. After James Redford beat his physical issues as a youngster, it appeared like things may get better. Things would fall into place just as they should, especially after his second liver transplant. The Redford family, on the other hand, had a unique circumstance. Outliving one's children is an aspiration shared by all parents, even those with 2. Unfortunately, James passed away in October 2020 at the age of 58 due to liver cancer. Scott passed away when James was just 3 years old. His parents were really worried that he would die too, like his brother when he was born. But he did manage to stay alive, much to the shock of his loved ones. While waiting for a new transplant in 2019, doctors diagnosed him with bile duct carcinoma. He was sick for a year before he finally succumbed to his disease. James founded the Institute with the goal of educating the general population about liver transplantation. He and Kyle were married, and they had 2 children together. Kyle Redford was the one who broke the news of her husband's death on Twitter. Robert Redford has spent his entire life living this horrible life. Despite sharing his optimism with the world, he remained hopeful and stubborn. Robert Redford is an inspiration because he has persevered through adversity and shown us the value of living in the present and appreciating the people in our lives no matter how bad things become. Your thoughts on the tragic events of Robert Redford's life? Leave a comment and be sure to watch more interesting videos. See you later.